we're reading about Jane's account of things. Subject number 7 of the book taken Inside the Alien Human Abduction Agenda by Karla Turner Ph.D. No, apparently is no longer with us. And we're at the top of page 88. The antenna disappeared and came up close, and there was an eye, large and round, silver metal thing in the area of a hose. I heard metal clanks and a silver thing come up to my ear. It feels clinical. He tells me everything is okay, and he knows I am not afraid, but I am reassured telepathically. I know they hear me, and also he's reading me, and there is an absolute feeling of immense power and rather impersonal caring and kindness. I also feel concern, but again, personal, yet impersonal, to a great degree. As I dwell on it, the eyes was truly alien, and rather not human. God, it was intense, probing, objective, impersonal, and all-powerful. The silver metal thing is looking. It connects to my ear by clamping on the outside. In fact, it clamps on and covers my entire ear, and something is inserted, something that implants and infects my brain chemicals and certain subtle functions. It is adding. The implant looks like a very tiny oblong cylinder, about a quarter of an inch long and smaller, made of non-metal stuff. I am reassured during the entire procedure it does not hurt too much, and I ask why they need that, and he looks deep into my eyes for a long time. Then he says that it was my choice, that I agreed to all of this a long time ago. I said I didn't remember the agreement, and when did I do that? He answered, before you were born. We've had this conversation before. I asked him, why me? He said, because you became open and now the awakening has begun. He told me that neither I nor many others awakened could stop the arousal of ourselves or of mankind. The trigger had been pulled, and everything was to schedule. They pulled the thing away from my ear, and it hurt and stung for a little bit. I felt like something had been drawn out, an energy of some sort. They inserted sound in my head, and for a little bit afterward I was blind and could only see brilliant revolving and iridescent colors, so intense. I had a momentary light explosion accompanied by a brief, unbelievable wave of head pain. But I saw my eyes come close. His head touched my head, our left eyes almost touching, and the pain stopped. His eye was all I could see. His eye took the color and pain away. I was so grateful. His eye made me sleepy. I was comforted by the closeness of the energy and by his eye. I can't say yet what he looked like because the globe screen is strong. The globe had seams of some sort. The eye is partially outlined in some fashion. A black void liquid somehow observing me at all levels of my being. At one point during all this, but I can't remember when, I was also told that the power-hungry governments of the earth were going to be very suspicious because their worst nightmare was about to come true. That even they hadn't fully estimated the effect of the Voyager's arrival would have on the worldwide human population, of the rapid growth of their influence, that their government still hadn't fully accepted that it was a losing battle, and eventually they will acquiesce. I can't say that word, acquiescence. Okay, I almost got it there. This is for me. I got AQUI
Acquiesce.
Acquiesce. I don't know. I know why I couldn't say it. Anybody who's been listening to my readings knows why I can't say it. Okay. Acquiesce. The implications of such statements, if true, are enormous. Jane didn't know what to think about the communication, although the examination scenario seemed real. Moreover, the memory differed from the spiritual encounter that emerged in the hypnotic recall. Were they two episodes of the same event, or was one memory a contrived screen for the other? Or could they both have been contrived? Throughout everything she had experienced, Jane's thoughts and emotions have run the gamut. At first I was terrified, she wrote in our initial contact, but now I'm not. I feel whatever has happened has been not to hurt me. I feel like a piece of myself was missing, has been reconnected. I've had deep spiritual experiences and feelings since the October 1992, and all of the personal nature. I am uneasy sometimes, but I do not think I am afraid anymore. In fact, she reported a very sudden change in her emotions that occurred in the winter of that year. I went to bed afraid, she said, and I woke up the next day very detached, as if she'd been tranquilized and reassured. Her initial thoughts about the alien agenda, however, still made a knot in her stomach. It's really all for their purpose, she said, something that was prepared and developed long ago, and she felt she had been somehow given a choice to accept them, although it doesn't matter to them either way. They win. Jane didn't know why she was taken for alien involvement, nor what exactly she had been trained or prepared to do. Her only clue is a sense that she is supposed to introduce people close to her to the reality of alien existence. You know, sometimes I feel used, she commented. Is all this of my free will for good, or am I a puppet? She did feel that the aliens have put information into a deep level of her mind as if she were stuffed full with suppressed knowledge. Further, she said she didn't feel ready to know until now. She says herself as one of millions in a grassroots movement who are being stimulated into a gradual realization. And Jane also sensed that the aliens had fostered within her mind a mistrustful attitude towards the government. Well, that's rightfully so. But she was not at all sure of the source of any of the events and communications because she felt that both positive and negative entities or groups may have interacted with her. As for the aliens themselves, she has only their actions and words to guide her assessment. Once, when she telepathically asked them for a better term to call them than alien, she was given the emphatic Voyager epithet. Voyagers. There's probably a better way to say it too, because where are they actually coming from? And are they really aliens? Travelers. They said that the awakening humans are being made into harbingers of discord, discontent, and revolution. Judging by their actions, Jane is not always reassured. We are not seeing the true intelligence behind all these scenes, she said. The fact that they put us through episodes of setup scenes and absurd stuff frightens her. I'm afraid we might find that intelligence so cold and impersonal, she said, that it would be unbearable. And that's the end of her story. Now I got number 8. Number 8 is Angie. She's in the number 8 case, and here we go. Obviously, part 3 dealt with a large part that was dealt with Jane's her experience. The youngest of 8 women in this project, Angie is a delightful, extremely intelligent woman whose conscious memories of abduction and encounters could fill a book on their own. She first contacted me after reading Into the Fringe and briefly described a number of incidences and her experiences that closely paralleled many things my family and I had witnessed. As in the case of Beth, Pat, Lisa, Angie remembered abductions involving apparently military personnel before our contact. And since that time, there have been several others of a most disturbing nature. When we first began to correspond, however, Angie was not at all concerned about the possibilities of detrimental military activity. After all, the aliens who had been abducting her assured her that the humans and their company were controlled by them, and since Angie did not fear the aliens, she likewise wasn't worried about the humans with them. Since that time, her attitude has radically changed for very good reasons. Before examining the military contact encounters, it is best to begin with some background about Angie and the alien contacts. Born in 1966, Angie was German and Scotch and has German and Scotch ancestry from her mother, and since her father was adopted, she knows nothing about that side of her family. She is married and operates a small cattle ranch with her husband, Paul, outside of a large city in Tennessee. Angie is artistically talented, working in abstracts and lithography and cartooning and clay. Before her first alien abduction in 1988, she knew very little about such things and had never thought they could be part of her life. She did recall a few odd incidences from her childhood when I questioned her, including a strange event when she was 4, and she and her father were riding in a van when a blinding flash of light filled the vehicle. Immediately after the flash, Angie remembered feeling as if she were in a long gray tunnel, but nothing more. Since that time, except for seeing a huge fireball in the sky, she could not recall anything unusual in her life. Until the night of July 24, 1988, that is, Angie had gone to bed as usual, and then she suddenly awoke to find herself outside in the dark, paralyzed, facing a group of beings unlike anything she'd ever seen. They were frail, hairless, white beings who had the most mesmerizing eyes, she told me. And then she was amazed to watch their cattle-like eyes wiggle and change shape. I've seen that before. They stared at her. She felt as if they were reading her mind. "This must be a dream," she said over and over. "You are not having a dream," one of the beings told her telepathically. "We will show you, and you have to go away with us for a little while." He pointed with one of his 3 fingers towards the woods, of course, and the other beings carried Angie in that direction. Terrified as she saw her house and husband receding, she begged the creatures not to take her any further, but her pleas were ignored. Angie's panic, combined with her phobia of the dark, made her very agitated, until the leader of the group injected something in her left forearm. She began to pass out, and the last words she heard were, "Just relax a little." The next morning, Angie found 2 red dots in that place on her forearm. That's when I accepted the possibility that I'd encounter something physically genuine, she said. I did not understand its meaning. I spent the rest of the day wondering about the uncanny event, about how I reacted with fear because the woods seemed so dark and scary, and mostly about those dinky 3-foot-tall beings. Who were they, Angie? Who were they? Angels? Elves? Fairies? Ghosts? Aliens? When I went to bed that night, their image was still fresh in my mind, but I did not have any thoughts about them ever returning for me. But the beings did return, and they have continued to come back periodically ever since. For the next 2 nights, Angie had clouded memories of being with the creatures, which could have been dismissed as dreams except for the fact that she discovered more red dots on her body after both nights. Then in August, she had a conscious encounter, waking in bed to see two grays in her room, instantaneously paralyzed and calmed by their hypnotic eyes. She floated through the house with them and outside to an unbelievable sight. It was a big silvery disc with revolving red, green, yellow lights. Angie said suspended about 2 feet above the ground, and it was noiseless. When I first saw it, there was no doubt in my mind that it was a UFO. That's when I accepted the possibility that the beings were aliens. This time Angie was not afraid. In fact, her curiosity was aroused, so she stepped forward to touch the craft. But one of the Greys leaped in front of her and warned her not to get close while the craft was in the discharge phase, because it could harm her. An opening appeared in the craft, and Angie saw a handsome young man with blonde hair and tan jumpsuit standing inside. Teleported aboard the craft as if sucked into a long tube of electric orange light. She felt separated from her body at that time because she could not see it tumbling and twirling along beside me, and all the bones, veins, and internal organs were visible. That's a bit weird. Inside the craft, Angie was placed in a black chair where the blonde man scanned her visibly, inducing a sensation of orgasm. She asked if he, too, were an alien, and the man smiled and nodded. The craft began to move, forcing her body back in the chair to her consternation, as she has a great fear of flying. "Where are we?" she asked, and then a small oval window appeared on the wall. She looked out and saw thousands of brilliant lights in the midst of a deep black space, but no earth and moon. 4 Greys entered the room, where one of them handed a case to the blonde man. He removed a glowing green ball, while 2 of the Greys floated Angie to an odd table. The man put the ball on her abdomen and moved it in a circular pattern, growing warm, and she felt a tugging sensation in that area and asked what was being done to her. The man said she was ripe enough and would be able to conceive, and she told him that she and her husband had been trying unsuccessfully to have a child. The man told her she had not done so because her blood, immune, and genetic system operate differently than her husband, than other humans, "I am part alien?" I asked, confused. One of the Greys told her that she had been altered a little to fulfill a special purpose. The blonde man said they had produced a novel breed from ova they had taken from me. He told her she was a chosen one, and their children and her children and others are chosen way to conquer the world through mastering the power of insinuations. Really? Mastering the power of insinuations message. She would be given another encounter. Angie then became very sleepy and passed out until 9 a.m. following morning, back in bed. And this, so I'm going to download part 3. And before I do anything else, let's clear this off for part 4. Okay. Let's see. One read. I'll do some more reading out of take. Did I remember? I think I did, but just once again, that's the book I'm reading. I can't wait to read the the Eighth Tower by John A. Keel. That is real life, an eye-opener. One of the Greys told her that she had been altered a little to fulfill a special purpose. The chosen one. One morning, back in bed. Okay. I read that. Somewhere I've left off. After these incredible incidents, Angie seemed to undergo an internal change. My husband and other people started noticing I seemed calmer and less talkative and drained him a lot. She told me my husband wondered what it was that I had been inscribing into those new diaries I purchased. I told him that I was only recording dreams. I desperately wanted to share my story with someone, but did not because there was no one in my personal social circle who wasn't skeptical of such issues. I feared that if I told any of them, they would question my sanity, and so I kept my secrets for a long time to come. During the next few months, she had only vague memories and dreams of the other encounters, and after one of these, she found 4 red dots on her abdomen in a diamond pattern. But the UFOs were not the only craft to land on her property, for on November 23rd, she heard the sound of helicopters. Looked out to see 2 black choppers of Air Force insignia overhead. When one of them landed on her property, and she grabbed a coat and raced outside, but they zoomed away before she could reach them. This was the first time helicopters had been in the area, but it wouldn't be the last. In February 1989, she had another abduction in which she was called a chosen one, and was also shown a scene familiar from other abductee reports. One of the aliens touched her forehead, and she said A series of graphic images exploded in her mind. She saw a reddish gold desert planet with two setting suns, a galaxy, a blood red moon, and fiery orange sun exploding, and underground city before she blacked out. And when she regained consciousness, an alien told her their home was Cassiopeia, Cassiopeia, is that what it is? In the heavens, but they had made a home for themselves on Earth before humans were created. After this, Angie passed out again and was returned home. 2 days later, another helicopter circled the property, and a man who claimed to work for the utility company arrived, asking to examine two transformers on the farm. He said that there had been many power failures in the area, but Angie was suspicious since she hadn't recalled any such failures, nor had she contacted the utility company. 8 nights after the last abduction, Angie recalled walking up in the backyard with 4 aliens. Naked, although feeling neither cold nor embarrassed, she watched, next page, 2 aliens working with a car-sized device, while a third one appeared to be digging soil samples. The 4th alien showed her a small black box, which he gave her and asked her to look inside. She did, and again her mind exploded and was filled with images, this time abstract patterns of bright colors. He then told her that she would soon have the power to make mental contact with other chosen ones and would be able to influence their minds. And then he touched her chest and she blacked out. The next day, when Angie went outside, she found a large circle in the grass which looked parched, and several chunks of blobby black metal slag. Excited by this proof, Angie photographed the metal and the circles, which didn't disappear over a year and a half. Analysis of the metal in 1993 showed it to be ordinary iron slag. In March, she had 2 cloudy memories of abductions. Both involved the abdominal procedures, and one of them she saw a group of dazed humans in the same room. On March 23rd, Angie counted 19 helicopters flying over the farm and thought she could make out Air Force designations on them. 10 days later, Angie recalled another abduction, but this one differed dramatically from the previous encounters. She found herself outside in the dark with a thin blue alien who mind scanned her. Then 5 men came out of the shadows, 4 of whom were ordinary men wearing holographic uniforms and with crew cuts, and the 5th was a dark-haired humanoid and a long khaki coat with many pockets. This man, Angie said, touched the blue alien and it suddenly shrank into a marble-sized orb of white light, which the humanoid then pocketed. He told her that these beings, a non-physical form of energy, were created and controlled by his group. Did you create humans too? Angie asked, and he confirmed this. What did you want from me? She continued. We want to talk to you about your life, he told her. That's all she asked. There's more, he said, and one of the uniformed men took Angie to a black van parked beside her garage. Is that a real van, or is that a spaceship, she wondered. You can't judge a book by its cover, another man replied cryptically. Inside the van, Angie saw bench seats, carpet, and a large control panel, and the other men entered, and Angie wondered if they belonged to some military group. Are you all with the Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines? She inquired. The oldest man replied, but she was beginning to have a hard time understanding everything he said. She thought he said a group belonged to an organization called High Shelf. Next page. Which worked mainly in special underground stations. He also told her that she and other chosen ones were part of a mind control project to carry instructions in temperance via thought transference to other people. Once he answered her questions, he began an interrogation about her life. Angie could recall only a few questions, however. In her altered condition, she asked, for instance, if she remembered the aliens coming to her when she was young, which she did not. He asked about her views on life and death. After the interview, which seemed quite lengthy, the man activated something on the control panel, and Angie found herself back in bed, fully alert and tingling all over. At 5:10 a.m., she quickly dressed and ran outside to see if they were still there, but the yard was empty. Thinking about all her encounters, Angie came to several conclusions. First, she now believed that there was something much bigger than man's view and theories and religions into the universe. She believed that the aliens were carrying out a psychic transformation with her and others for a good purpose. Through the following months, Angie had several more encounters and UFO sightings, and the most traumatic series of events began with an abduction in which she was impregnated. 2 weeks later, she took 2 home pregnancy tests, which proved positive. She and her husband were elated. Angie did not tell Paul about the alien impregnation, since he had not believed her previous accounts of sightings and intrusions. She thought the baby inside her was a special gift from her alien friends, and being unfamiliar with the typical alien process of impregnation and subsequent retrieval of the fetus, she looked forward to carrying the child to term and beginning a family which she and Paul desired. They had even selected names for the baby. But a month after the impregnation encounter, Angie started having unusual physical symptoms, sweating and tingling during the day and pulsating sensations in the womb at night, in the womb area at night. This continued for over 2 weeks until the morning of July 4th. Angie suffered a bloody, painful miscarriage. It happened in my bathroom, she said. After hours of heavy bleeding and a terrible cramping, the fetus came out in my hands. It wasn't like a normal fetus, large, 3 inches long, devoid of sex organs, and had black slanted eyes, a resemblance of white aliens she had encountered. Under a strange compulsion, Angie put the fetus in a jar of water and hid it in a barn loft. Later, she went back and found the jar was missing. Paul took Angie to the doctor right away, as she lost a lot of blood and subsequently had a D&C procedure. She couldn't understand why she had lost the baby, having taken excellent care of herself, and the loss was devastating. At a much later date, Angie underwent 2 hypnotic regressions, in which 3 of her encounters were examined. One of these was the loss of the fetus, and in that regression, Angie described a hitherto remembered bedroom visitation in the hours before her miscarriage. Several beings and a large floating blue light entered the bedroom. While some of these aliens busied themselves with Paul, the 2 others carried out. Next page. An abdominal procedure on Angie involving a small cylindrical device that clicked. Nothing further intruded until September, when Angie awoke with a vague recollection of being on a craft with her sister Julia. That morning, Julia phoned and told her, "I had the weirdest dream last night." She described being with human-looking aliens in blue jumpsuits in a curved dome room. She saw Angie there too, in the silver jumpsuit like the alien wore. She recalled Angie telling her, "They want to give us eternal life." That same details had been part of Angie's memories, and the 2 sisters got together to discuss the shared dreams. Angie told her sister then, for the first time, about her other encounters, revealed to the end the emotional isolation and fear of ridicule. Revealed to end the emotional isolation, fear of ridicule that had kept her quiet before this. Her circle of confidence expanded in November, or confidants, when her father told of seeing a dome orange UFO while out in the Smoky Mountains with some friends. Angie and Julia shared their experience with him, and that prompted their father to open up even more. "The 3 of us learned a lot that day," Angie said. "I told Dad all about my alien encounters. Dad told us about his past encounters and about our mother's experiences, too." I cried. "That was the day I learned that our parents have been involved with the aliens since before we were born." Intermediate abductions continued to occur. From December 1989 to April 1992, Angie recalled 15 events. In one, she was shown a nursery of clones similar to other abductee reports, and she was told that the aliens had programmed her to hide the fetus after her miscarriage. When Angie asked if the aliens had restored the fetus to life, she found it hard to understand the reply that its physical body had been stored and its soul recycled. And another, Angie was shown a clone infant as well as 9 hybrid tots, and was told they would be used to prepare humans for the changes. When she asked what changes, She was told it involved human spiritual transformation. Whatever the hell that means. One abduction during this time was very singular, as Angie recalled going to an underground facility that her uniformed human escort said was in northern Arizona. He told her there were other stations around the world, including bases in New Mexico, the North Pole, and Africa. When Angie asked who was in charge of the high shelf operation, another of the men, a blonde humanoid, replied that his kind can control everything. What about the Greys and the other aliens? She asked, thinking of several different types she had encountered. Are they involved too? By degrees, he answered. What about all these humans? She persisted. These military people. We control them. The blonde smiled. The next page. She was taken to a group of other abductees or chosen ones, and was handed a small black box and told to open it. And when she pulled it open, the lid, and she's missed. Wait a minute, did we just read this? Did we not just read this? It's just a repeat. Once again, they make her open the black box, okay. At least that's what she claims. Chosen one. And they handed her a small black box and told her to open it. When she pulled open the lid, and she said a mist of brilliant violet light came out, covering the group of abductees and causing a powerful electrical sensation, after which she blacked out. Throughout these contacts, Angie had felt positive about her involvement with the aliens, including finally the loss of her unborn child, which she believed was for a higher purpose. In the abduction, she and Julie remembered sharing. Julia had accepted Angie's statement about getting immortal life from the beings, so she too had a positive attitude. It was surprising therefore, that Julia was extremely frightened a month later when her sister spotted a UFO. Returning from Georgia on December 29, they were driving along a state highway in Tennessee at 7:30 p.m. and they saw two unusual vehicles. The first one Angie described as an old spray-painted bus traveling very slowly, full of hippie folks, with the words "Magic Bus" painted across the rear. The sisters laughed about it, but then the bus slowed to about 10 miles per hour, and Angie could not pass it as they moved up the hill. She and Julia saw some of the bus occupants open their windows and shout, and then one of them pointed upward, and she looked in the direction and saw a bright blue object above the treetops ahead. It had a dome, wide rim, black and round portals. Angie looked and Julia shouted, "That's a UFO." The hippie bus accelerated and it was soon out of sight as Angie's Corvette came to a complete stop on its own. The blue glow engulfed the car. "Oh God, it's behind us," Julia screamed in fear. Julia's account of the incident to me, she wrote, "When it came towards us, I got scared, and Angie told me there was nothing to be afraid of, but I still felt afraid and got down on the floorboard of the car. There was a brief, intermittent beeping sound, and Angie said, and then all was silent and darkness. The UFO was gone, the car's headlights popped on, Angie turned the ignition, which worked perfectly, and started to drive away, telling Julia it was safe for her to get out of the floorboard. God damn it, Angie, Julia replied. Let's go. They took off, and a few minutes later, Julia said, Do you know what time it is? 10:20, and she didn't believe her. But when she checked her own watch, it had been the same time. It had the same time. 3 hours had passed since they spotted the blue UFO, and the sisters didn't have a single memory of what transpired. On April 1992, Paul and Angie moved onto a cattle ranch, and an entirely new series of mysterious events began. Their specialty beef business was doing very well until something started killing off the cattle. Within a year, the losses amounted to thousands of dollars. A small number of them had been mutilated, Angie reported. One cow was missing a head, another had been disemboweled, and a bull calf appeared as if he had been ripped apart by a Tyrannosaurus. The bodies of some of the mutilated ones had peculiar stigmata, such as shaved places, clean and bloodless holes and gashes. There wasn't a single scratch anywhere on the rest of the dead cattle. Many of the cattle died in February and March of 1993, when other farmers in the general area also reported dead and mutilated animals. Reading about one of these reports, Angie contacted the paper and got in touch with a veterinarian who examined someone else's dead cattle. In the first case, she reported that the cattle had died of toxins on an unknown source, which Angie's cattle, all he could report was dead from unknown causes. The alien activity after this was rather different than what had transpired before, and for the most part Angie was left with very cloudy and incomplete memories of events. One abduction, however, is worth noting at some length. Walking aboard a craft, naked on a table, Angie saw humanoids and two different kinds of grays. Momentarily, two more humanoids in red suits entered, and Angie recognized the blonde one as the man she'd seen before. She asked if he had a name, and he told her Karla Turner. He told her that it was time for her group of chosen ones to carry out their assigned task. This involved making contact with certain people throughout the world to collect data from their minds. That data, in turn, would then be collected from the minds of the chosen ones by the aliens. All of this would be done, he said, through tiny implants in the head, devices that served many purposes. They could help the implanted people use their special senses. For instance, stay in contact with one another through dreams. Besides collecting data, the implants could also send instructions. When Angie asked about the overall purpose, the agenda, she was told that through tempering human minds, the aliens wanted to remove filth and evil and negativity from humans. Having been given repeated lectures about her special abilities as a chosen one. At one point, Angie initiated an experiment with herself. I decided to test my mental powers by giving thought transference a try. She reported, I went to bed around 11 p.m. and concentrated long and hard to project my image into my sister's dream. During the process, I drifted off to sleep and soon found myself in a dream in which Julia was present. I phoned my sister the next morning to let her know about my attempt to reach her in her dream. But before I had a chance to say anything, she recounted a dream in full detail, and she also decided to try hypnotic regression in order to uncover anything she could about the events she'd been unable to remember consciously. Undergoing two, next page, hypnosis sessions, Angie was surprised to retrieve details of a childhood encounter in one session, going back to age 4 when she and her father had been blinded by a flash of light while riding in a van. Angie recalled being taken in a gray cigar-shaped craft where she saw several men and women in white coats. One man was long, dark blonde hair with long, one man with long, dark blonde hair. Okay. Took charge of her, carrying the crying child to a strange table. It's metal and has an edge around it, she described, like for blood to drain off. And there is something down at the foot under the table, but I couldn't see it clearly. Acting in what she perceived as a hurried manner, the man strapped her wrists down as she lay on the table and placed on her head a head beam thing with moving red and yellow lights. The hypnotist instructed Angie to view the scene from a distance rather than reliving it, and she obliged. I can see my hands twitching, she said, and the wristbands are making my fingers twitch and jerk. I'm laying there with a head beam on, and the eyes are open, and the pupils are dilated like I'm dead. She then described a procedure in which a clear tube was inserted vaginally and filled with a pinkish liquid. As one of the women pressed on Angie's abdomen. When she was revived, the blonde man tried to jolly her out of her terrified state, and she was returned to the van, which exited the cigar-shaped craft by flying out of the opening on its own. As Angie reported, we were coming down to the road. She said, I can see it clearly because it's daytime, and the van lands smoothly on the road. It's moving by itself for a minute, and then when I notice it going in the wrong direction, we are going the other way before they took notice. Then, okay, what is your father doing now? The hypnotist asked. He sort of shakes his head, she said, like he's perplexed. He keeps driving. In August and September 1993, Angie recalls 3 other encounters, including one in which she saw her father aboard the same craft. When she questioned him, he describes an abduction memory for that same night, although he didn't recall seeing Angie. In another, she was given information about alien life in other parts of the galaxy, about their travel technology, and about their having created life from forms on Earth, including humans. But the next month, the abduction and encounters scenarios changed abruptly, beginning October 2nd, when Angie woke up and found herself downstairs in a guest room with a youthful male humanoid wearing an oversized red plaid shirt, faded jeans, and black leather boots. Angie felt in control of her senses, unlike some previous situations, and asked the young man several questions, including his origins. In spite of his very human appearance, he told her he and his kind were extraterrestrials and wanted to know if the term made her feel uneasy. "No," she replied. "I am not afraid of you anymore." She could see a silvery disk outside the house and assumed she would be taken there, but instead the man embraced her and she became partially paralyzed from the chest up. Then he lay her on the floor and had intercourse with her, after which she felt faint and passed out. She remembered this occurring again on the nights of October 3rd and 4th, and on the morning after the October 3rd encounter, Angie awoke with blood dripping from her nostrils and increasing congestion and pain in her shoulders. In spite of this, she had not been upset by the 3 encounters. Since the intercourse had not been frightening, she wondered why the man had induced the partial paralysis and subsequent loss of consciousness. 4 nights later, she went through an encounter that was far less pleasant. Angie went to bed late that night around 1:30 a.m. and folded her clothes neatly on the bedside table before turning out the light. In what seemed like only a few minutes later, she awoke fully alert, listening to the sound like a jet engine that was loud and getting louder. Her next perception was that she was not in the bedroom, but rather standing completely dressed in an unfamiliar grassy clearing in the woods near an old dirty road, and she wasn't alone. With me were 3 apparently frightened young women, and she described one was lying face down in the grass weeping, and she became frightened herself. For the first time since her initial abduction, my instincts said that we were about to be abducted by a force so great that we would not be able to control our situation no matter how hard we might pray to God. There we go. And one of the women, tall and plump with brown hair, started yelling, Here they come. Here they come. Come they here. Come they here. The sound grew unbearable, and as the strange-looking airplane flew towards them and landed like a helicopter, 2 of the women panicked and ran into the woods, while Angie and the brunette stood frozen in place for fear. A group of men in black uniforms emerged and began rounding up all the women. As they were hurried towards the craft, Angie said she remembered telling them that I am not an animal don't appreciate them treating me like one. Ignoring her, the men pushed the women into a narrow compartment at the rear of the craft, which then took off and frightened Angie even more with its erratic flight. She began to pray and then blacked out. After coming to my senses, Angie reported, I found myself sitting in a chair and in some place that looked like a military base. I saw several men in military uniforms leading some humans towards these long gray buildings. Two men took Angie into one of the buildings where she saw a group of people seated around a conference table, some in uniform and others in ordinary clothing. One of the men who had on a uniform was with many decoration ribbons and stared at Angie wordless from the table and engaged her in a brief telepathic conversation. Then a woman came up behind Angie, and when she turned to look at her, the woman's gaze paralyzed her. The woman gave Angie a black-red liquid to drink, which made her dizzy and sleepy to the point of passing out. After that, she remembered only a brief view of the buildings from a distance and then the sound of the strange aircraft once again. When Angie underwent hypnosis, she chose to examine this experience, recovering a few more details. After passing out from the bitter liquid, Angie recalled waking up in one of the 5 chairs that seemed to be on a stage or platform. A man and 3 women were sitting in chairs on both sides of me. She said, I experienced physical paralysis and couldn't think straight. When the general gazed in my eyes, he wasn't any more than 2 inches from my face. I lifted my head, then dropped it. He lifted my hand and then dropped it, like checking to see if I was in a deep trance, and then checked my pupils. He did the same with the others. The women presented a small reddish brown box to him. She continued. He pulled out a tube from underneath it and attached a tube to something between my chair and the next person's. I blacked out again and have absolutely no memories of what transpired during the remaining time I was there. When she got out of bed the next morning, her neatly folded clothes were scattered on the floor. She had a hissing sound in one ear and problems hearing the rest of the day. She discovered that the door of the basement standing open that morning. When Angie called the next day to tell me about the incident, I could hear helicopters flying over her house. She had been very unnerved by the incident and said it was all scary and confusing. The fear turned to sheer terror the following month when once again Angie was forcibly taken by men in military uniforms from her bedroom. Earlier that day, November 9th, another dead cow was found in the barn. The body was unmarked, but blood had seeped from its nose and mouth. There was no sign of a struggle, however. That night, after going to sleep, Angie awoke to go to the bathroom, and immediately she heard helicopters approaching. From the bathroom window, she looked out, but she saw nothing and could no longer hear the copters. Angie went back to bed and to sleep, but woke up again hearing not only helicopters, but also the sound of vehicles coming up the drive. She tried to arouse Paul, but he wouldn't wake up. The back door opened, and Angie went limp when a group of men in olive drab jumpsuits came into the bedroom. Paul started to stir, but one of the men touched him with a wand-like device, and Paul stopped moving. The men took Angie outside, where 2 green helicopters were hovering. She was put inside one of them, given an injection, and told she was being taken in for evaluation. She was also fitted with a chest and shoulder device from which a breathing tube was placed in her mouth. For the duration of the flight, perhaps 20 minutes, and the chopper landed in a rural area with buildings and many helicopters in view. Military personnel were busy on the grounds, some leading civilians and perhaps other abductees through the base. A gray van approached our helicopter, and she told me and stopped about 20 yards ahead of us. 2 men in olive drab suits exited the rear of the vehicle, and then a third one came out with a tall, slim man in a pinstripe shirt. Pinstripe shirt, huh? The fellow with the striped shirt had metal cuffs on his wrist and white tape around his mouth, over his mouth, and appeared to be in a state of panic. 2 men carried back rifles came into the scene. She continued, that grieving man was pushed to the ground, and one of the armed men pumped one bullet into his back. In complete terror, Angie was then carried over to where the man's body lay. She asked why they had killed the poor man. You talked, one of the men said. But what is this got to do with him? She said. We take one like him each time a recruit talks, he told her. You could have wasted me instead, Angie replied, but the man said she was too valuable as part of an alien project involving implants. She said she knew they were trying to brainwash her and make her fear them, but the man said they only wanted to keep her in line. He told her that she would be forced to watch more such killings if she continued to talk to Karla Turner about her experiences, and that more of her cattle would also be killed. She was then taken into a building and underwent a series of physical procedures, including blood taking, a shower of some sort, and a gynecological exam before being returned home. Angie was extremely angry and frightened by the experience. I was concerned for her safety when she told me about it. By that time, I had begun this book project and asked Angie if she wanted to withdraw from it, but she refused to be intimidated by the threats and continued to cooperate with me. 4 nights later, the men in military uniforms returned, and Angie was flown to an area near a hillside where she was taken into an underground facility. She was given an injection, followed by a shower to remove some brown dust that had gotten on her earlier, and then another gynecological procedure. She was told that she and some other women there were part of a genetic experiment which involved cloning and DNA replication. After this, she was escorted to another area where several tables were covered with plastic sheeting, which one of the medical women removed. I recall seeing 2 large control panels and 2 large metal crates near the table. Angie said the medical woman told me that they called it the table of screams because a lot of women who have been put there freak out when they get a look at some of the probes that are used. Placed on a table, Angie was fitted with a headphone type device that emitted a loud beeping, and she temporarily lost consciousness. When she came to, she was face down on a table, but able to move. A small silver box with the open end towards me sat just a few inches from my face, she said. Inside the box was a gray and white mechanical device of some sort which made clicking sounds. The lady came around in front of me and poked a thin black rod inside the mechanical device, she said. It's been deprogrammed. We've never had this sort of thing happen before. And she asked if they were doing something with the implant in her head, and was told that there was more than one implant device in there, and that 2 were the alien products and 1 came from them. Angie asked, why in the hell have you gone and stuck implants in my body? What are they for? The medical woman told her that the aliens do different things with them that her group cannot discern. They won't give us all their knowledge. I'm sure you understand that by now. Angie reported to the woman as saying, having encountered a number of physically different aliens, Angie asked which ones the woman meant. She was told that the military group was involved with some groups of aliens, but not with 2 of the groups who had contacted Angie. She said that the military group's implants monitor how many times implanted abductees came into contact with alien beings, as well as recording the approximate location of the pickup. In the course of future procedures, Angie was held down while a woman inserted a probe into her left nostril. When they performed a second test, Angie was told that the alien implants had deprogrammed those from the military group. Her next recollection is of being taken to a room where other women where they were all interrogated by an older man in an officer's uniform whom she remembered as a major. According to Angie, the major said, "You people are going to tell me everything. I don't want to be an asshole and force it out of you, but if that's what it takes." 3 women were questioned before Angie, and when her turn came, she was asked about the information she'd been given by the whites and grays about their implants. She told him that she'd seen 4 kinds of grays and didn't know which ones had used the implants on her. "You're lying," the major replied. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Which aliens do you want to know about?" she asked. I told you I've been with a lot of them. Let's start with the slender gray aliens, he told her. Did any of those talk about implants? I can't think, she said. You're confusing me. It was her way of evading his questions because she felt it was none of his business. He ordered that she be taken to another area called the probing room, where she lost consciousness after receiving another injection. After each abduction by the military group, Angie grew more and more apprehensive and fearful. When I asked her about any positive help she might have received from the aliens she thought of as her friends, Angie replied, in January 2nd, 1994, letter showed Angie replied in a January 2nd, 1994 letter showed how much more she now questioned her experiences than she had done in the beginning. Since the military group stepped into the scene, she wrote, there haven't been any aliens to come to my rescue. I constantly pray for help and guidance from the good sources in the universe, but there just hasn't been any help on my part. I don't know which aliens are trying to help me and which aliens are out to deceive me. The spiritual growth and all the good things I've experienced may not be linked to my alien experiences. Maybe it's just something I brought about all by myself. Apparently there was someone else aware of her feelings, because 6 days after she wrote the letter, Angie had an alien abduction for the first time in months, which seemed designed in part to placate her. After going to bed one night on January 8th, she woke up to find herself on board a craft in the company of a gray. Angie said she was neither paralyzed nor in a trance state, and clearly recalls the alien using some device to locate and reactivate an implant by insertion of something into her ear. She was then told they were finished with her and she would be returned home. Before I go, Angie said, you're going to tell me what this is all about. The alien replied that information had just been placed in the implant and that Angie would know everything in due time, but she insisted on asking more questions. When she asked why the military personnel had given her so much injections, the alien said that they used tranquilizer drugs on all recruits to prevent them from running away. She said the alien also apologized for the military group's indiscretions and told her she would not be made to watch any more killing events. Angie had her doubts about this and told the alien that the warning had been for her not to talk, but that she had continued to talk since then. The alien replied that she should do what she felt was important. He said the military people have been untruthful about most of what they've told me, she reported, and that some of their demonstrations were mere illusions. It's part of their cover-up. She also questioned him about the spacecraft and was told that it operated on power of the mind, but she was unable to ask anything more because the four grays entered and led her through a corridor to exit from the craft just then. I saw that we were in a big hangar at some base, she said, and there must have been more than 50 military people there. She was told that those people would return her to her home, but before she could go over to them, one of the aliens used some device to render her unconscious. Her next memory was being back in her bedroom. That day she had recurrent bouts of pain on the side of her head where the probe had gone into her ear. As with most abductees, there is no ending yet to Andy's story, nor a clear understanding of the agenda behind her repeated abductions. But there are certainly a number of important questions raised by her account, which has only been partially presented here. Compared to other abduction scenarios, Angie's contains many of the typical elements: various physical exams, fetus retrieval, and baby presentation, visions of the desert world, sexual activity, training and instruction sessions, teleportation methods, the black box, punctured and bruised implants, to name a few. Similarly, her reports of activities and details in the encounters involving apparent military personnel contain much of the familiar form from other accounts. It contains much that is familiar from other accounts. What is very untypical, however, is that the richness of her collections. In most abductions, the person can only remember small parts of the total event, and this is true for Angie, too, in many of the encounters, but in some of them, she seems to have been allowed to have retained more than the usual levels of awareness. Either that or she just naturally is not as susceptible at times to the mind control procedures which are used to suppress abductees' memories. The abundance of information she received is also untypical. Certainly there are many abductees who have been instructed on various topics in the same way Angie had been, but she has managed to retain an enormous amount of this information, which can be correlated with the numerous but more incomplete reports from other cases on such topics as mind control methods, alien-human collusion, and implant capabilities. Still, she doesn't recall everything, as she has noted, and as hypnosis has shown. So why is she allowed to recall these particular things? Is this programmed or accidental? If programmed, by whom and for what purpose? Further questions are raised by a contradiction in the details of two related recent events. It concerns the controversial subject of covert cooperation between human agencies and alien groups. When Angie and the other women were questioned by the major, he focused at one point on what Angie knew about the implants of the whites and the grays. This implied that his organization was not familiar with those kinds and thus not allied in any way. Angie had also been told that the military group worked with some aliens not with all aliens. But in the July 8th abduction, Angie was aboard a craft with one of the Greys, who proceeded to discuss the military group in a negative manner. This implied that he was not allied with them. Yet when the craft landed, Angie saw they were inside a military facility. Some further explanation is clearly called for to resolve the confusion. From what she has observed of relations between our military organization and whatever its Agus, nice that Agus. Okay. No man, I can't say the word. Again.
Aegis.
Aegis. Why couldn't I say that? Whatever is Aegis and their alleged alien allies, Angie thinks they are at odds in some ways. Her impression is that the human organization is responsible for the extreme cover-up activities rather than the aliens. But this is based on, in part, upon one of the aliens' statements that they had no concern about their presence being known. A dubious statement, however, given their employment of memory suppression and virtual reality illusions. Given the alien VRS capabilities, there is always a question of the reality of these events. Just recently, however, Angie's husband told her he had a strange dream that some men broke into the house and took her away. Unhappily, she had the same dream that night. Angie is keenly aware of the unanswered questions. Although some of my experiences with them have led to a positive transformation, she once said, the aliens certainly are not any more open with me now than they were 5 years ago. Until I undergo hypnosis and some truth is recovered, there is no way of my really knowing right now which aliens are trying to help me and which aliens are trying to deceive me. All of them seem to handle things clandestinely, even the good ones. And they are all aliens in action and appearance as far as I can tell. It could very well be that some types of experimenting on me for their own benefit are lying to me and are lying to me just like they are lying to other people. I just don't think this is the case with all alien types I've encountered. I would want to think that at least one group is trying to help instead of harm and deceive me. I've learned to wash my hands of blind faith, and I'm now beginning to use my God-given reasoning faculties and extreme caution, reasoning and prayer, and deciding how I should respond to the aliens. And she said, I am a human being, and we humans do have feelings and rights. Whew. Man, there's another one? I thought there was... How come there's 9 of them? I thought there were 8. So let's go back to Amy again. All I can say is thank God there's only 150 pages. 55. But we'll get through it. There's good reasons to get through it. Believe it or not. Of all the contacts I've received after Into the Fringe was released, Amy's first letter was most compelling. She wrote as she explained, because it was the only way to get free of the compulsion that had begun in November of 1992 after an extraordinary dream. The following week she bought and read my book and then began the compulsion to rewrite me and share the dream. Amy, however, as I would find out, has a strong sense of independence, strong self-will, logic, skepticism, and admirable stubbornness. She resisted the ridiculous compulsion for several months, but by April she was ready to get it out of her system and reasoned that writing the letter would end it. In the first part, Amy describes some unusual events that corresponded with things I related Into the Fringe. These included odd phone behavior, which she humorously attributed to the phantom of the operator, and explained electrical problems and noises in the house, and unexplained electrical problems and noises in the house. None of the unusual experiences were attributed to alien activity. A glaring absence in comparison to the other contacts I'd gotten. But then she began to describe the dream. In the first scene, Amy and her daughter were in a campground where a huge tarantulas chased them. They got in the car and drove away, but the car started flying upward over the trees where she saw a huge moon. In front of the moon, she wrote, I saw the silhouettes of some small, tiny beings. They had big heads, like the aliens I had heard about, and they were moving about in front of the moon or light that glowed behind them. One turned and looked at me, and I saw large black eyes. I wasn't afraid of them. I thought, well, I've never actually seen one of them now. I know what they look like. She heard a lot of noise approaching, and then she fell onto a metal roof house. I knew the metal might be hot, she noted, so I knew not to touch it. Amy was on the second story, where she looked through large windows. Into one of the rooms, there she saw a group of men talking excitedly and heard a softer female voice telling them to calm down because there was work to do. The men looked human, but the female was part of the group of non-Earth representatives. When she was brought into the room, she said, the humans introduced me to a female alien wearing a white plastic mask so that her appearance would not frighten the others, and so they wouldn't focus on her eyes. Even though she wore a mask, I could see her eyes through the holes in the mask. They were big black eyes. From that point on, I remember being right next to her, and her face stayed very close to my face, very intense. The first part in the campground was either a natural dream or a screen sequence, but the illusory force rapidly disappeared as she moved from the campground to the room and the alien's company. Amy says the alien explained that her race, had been doing things to humans that they should not be doing. She and several groups of her race wanted to stop the abuse of the humans by her race. They were working with certain people on Earth to stop the process. Other humans in the room were ex-pilots, military officials, and other professionals. I was riveted now because Army's account echoed that of information I had recently received from two widely separate sources about the covert program or effort by certain parties in the intelligence and military organizations to resist alien abductions and to assist abductees in certain ways. There was no doubt in my mind that some of the military had an active hand in monitoring and questioning abductees, as my husband Casey had gone through such an experience. Other abductees, including Leah Haley and Debbie Jordan, had also reported contacts, intrusions, and kidnappings by human and seemingly military agents, and there was objective evidence in some cases to back up the reports, but this was a far cry from accounts of human agents actively helping abductees, much less a coalition of human and alien parties working against the abduction agenda, as the information alleged to come from the intelligence community has claimed. So far as I knew, this claim was not generally known for public ufological material. Yet here it was, an Amy's dream. Excuse me. Her account went on to say that the masked alien dominated Amy's attention, putting information directly into her mind. She explained all kinds of things, but I don't remember it all. Amy wrote, "I think I remember my role in the plan, but I don't think knowing, so I don't like knowing, so I forget. I don't want to remember." After she told me about those things, she told me about implants. She put a thin pencil-like metal instrument in my right ear, and I thought, oh, this is going to hurt, but I couldn't move or stop her. To my surprise, it didn't hurt. She pulled out the instrument, and on one end was a flat cylinder, small flesh-colored thing. It was reddish colored, but sort of transparent. If I looked closely, I could see something inside the thing. This part, Amy stressed, when she pulled that thing out of my ear was the most real seeming, the most clear and most intense part of my dream. It was very important that I remember. I think she said that to me. Amy said the alien explained certain things about the implant. Then she bent over while the alien removed a second implant from Amy's neck. It was a dark cylindrical object about 3 centimeters long, with something sticking on the end of it like very fine wires. The alien then explained how the implant operated. She showed me the thing she had pulled out of my neck and reported and said, "This is embedded deep into the spinal cord." I can't remember exactly what she explained about it, but I think the thing controlled the muscles of the body when activated. It blocked the brain and became the central command of the body. She also said that sometimes these things were implanted into a person's lower back, somewhere between the next page, fourth lumbar and the sacral coccygeal, I guess I should pronounce it, but it was more commonly planted in the neck. I don't want to remember how or why this thing functioned. The alien told Amy more about the implants, about her group's effort to remove them from abductees, and other things Amy couldn't recall. I remember that she was sorry for what some of her people had done, Amy wrote, but she and others were trying to help. The last thing I remember was that she was showing me something on a very large TV or computer screen or window. Amy then concluded her letter saying that when she read my book, she thought she should share the dream with me, although it felt ridiculous to write to someone about a dream. She made no claims for the dream, nor for having any actual alien experiences, and she did not ask for any advice, help, or response. Clearly, Amy had written the letter only to make the compulsion stop bugging her. I didn't need an invitation to respond, however, as her information was too compelling to ignore. Amy had commented that certain elements of her dream resembled parts of your book, but when I read back through the dream, I could see very little actual similarity other than the facts that my husband had seen military people in an abduction and that I had recalled an ear implant. I suspected there were other details she hadn't shared, however, because the people very often hold back from the entire truth when first testing the waters with someone they don't know. And not only was I intrigued by the contents of the dream, I was also curious to know more about Amy's potential situation because she lived in the very same city where my family and I lived during the experiences I wrote about in Fringe. Finally, there was the fact that her compulsion to contact me rather than some other researcher, and the possibility that our contact was being directed. I got her number from information and phoned as soon as possible. I learned that she was a divorced mother of 2 young daughters. who had just finished her master's degree in counseling. She was born in Dallas in 1953, of Scotch, Irish, English, and French Cajun ancestry, and had lived most of her life in the Metroplex area. Amy was truly surprised by my interest. In fact, as she later confessed humorously, she wondered if I were one taco short of full combo plate. But being interested in a dream. Amy did agree, however, to share more information about many of her experiences, which she confessed were rather fringe-like, even though they didn't in conscious reality involve aliens or UFOs. I asked her to describe any past unusual events of any sort, and a few weeks later she complied with a list of psychic, dream, telepathic, and miscellaneous experiences. It was a lot harder to make the list than I expected, she said. It was like trying to see through a dense fog. I've always kept these things at a distance from my awareness. That distance was rapidly diminishing, and in the course of the next several months, we explored together her memories and accounts found in the journals she had kept for many years. Amy's progressive self-rediscovery is a story of its own. Layer after layer of repression and denial were stripped away as she read back through the journals and realized that some powerful phenomena had been part of her life from the beginning. Even as young as 4, Amy had a feeling of influence from an unseen source. By 7, she had recognized the source more directly and called it the many in one, because she could hear many people speaking in unison. In adolescence, Amy called these forces the Council. At first, I only heard them talking to one another, not to me, she explained. I have only heard them audibly a few times, like when they told me my mother was going to die. She did, and other events that would happen in the future. Events did happen. She explained, I usually sense a dialogue of symbols, images, and concepts. When I listen, I forget how to speak, words cease to exist, and I forget what using vocal cords feels like. I call it the language without words. No trance states. She also had a brief yet vivid memory of seeing a small dark figure moving rapidly into her bedroom doorway and crouched down one night. And when she was 10, Amy recalled walking alone in a field near her house very early one morning. She had no idea why she was going there. She couldn't remember what happened when she arrived, nor much about her return home. In 1965, Amy dreamed of being in the backyard and waving goodbye to a UFO hovering above her. The next moment, she woke up surprised to be in her bed. The dream felt so real that she got up to see if the UFO was still nearby. It should be recalled, incidentally, that 1965 was a major flap year for UFO sightings and encounters throughout the country. A few months later, Amy went through a sudden internal change of attitudes and interests, and began to study the sciences and blossomed intellectually in school. The psychic elements also grew increasingly stronger. In her later teen years, Amy started having many dreams of unknown lady teaching her intensely about a number of things, beginning with levitation. Although she called them dreams, the teaching sessions had a real effect on Amy, and she once accidentally levitated a bottle of shampoo and almost frightened herself to death. When the sessions began to include instructions on affecting electrical systems, Amy sometimes witnessed the physical external effect of her ability on appliances and her environment. This is also the time when she accepted the fact that her existence was somehow being guided by the council. She was led to study certain subjects and was implanted with many concepts and ideas about time, space, physics, and other complex thoughts. Altogether, in fact, Amy became aware of a sense of destiny and purpose she couldn't understand but could only feel as a certainty. "I'm scared," she noted in her journal in January 1971, "because something so unknown and powerful is pulling at me. Every moment I'm caught off guard and pulled. I'm being pulled to a state or level of mind I cannot fight. Eventually I'll go, but in order that I won't be pulled under, I have got to prepare. Every time I shout, 'I'm not ready, leave me be,' if I think of something else, I'm okay." The other entries during this next page period include the comments. "I know certain things must be done. Like a robot I obey, and I feel like a messenger. I have always felt my purpose, but I never knew it." Much of what she received came not in words but in images and concepts. There was one statement, however, in which the words were clear. I am many. We are many. I am not. Amy said this statement was a sort of riddle about the council. It referred to my existence as an individual, I am I, my union with all minds, I am many, I am my absorption into the oneness, we are many, my identity as one, I am not. It is repeated often in my diaries. It's sort of like an oath, pledge, or understanding. It also is quite reminiscent of messages given to Lisa and Annetta. And they are, you are them, told to Lisa, and I are you, you are I, communication Annetta received during a question and answer meditation. Amy continued to have the training session dreams recorded in volumes of journals in which she was shown how to perform levitation, affect electrical systems, and move through solid objects. Looking back through the journals, she turned up a wealth of evidence showing the long-term involvement of unknown forces in Amy's life. Some of these details, in spite of her insistence that she had no recollection of being abducted, did indicate probable alien activity in the midst of all of it. Indicators of alien involvement, such as time gaps and UFO sightings, were in her journal and her memory, although she had downplayed most of these events. Besides the missing time episode and the small crouching figure she'd seen at age 7, which was accompanied by her eye being matted shut. The next morning, there was also an incident at age 15 of an unexplained physical presence intruding upon her. Staying with her niece, one night, Amy felt there was something in the bedroom before she went to sleep. She turned the light back on and looked, but no one was visible. After going to sleep, she had a strange, frightening dream about a family trying to reach the spirit of a dead relative. And when the people in the dream started screaming, at one point Amy started screaming too and woke up. I felt someone kicking and jabbing in the back, and the whole bed was shaking. The canopy was flapping, and I felt someone or something in my room again. I ran to my mother's room and told her, and she kissed me and said it was just a bad dream. It was so upsetting, in fact, that she refused to sleep in that room for 2 weeks. Other suspicious dreams were recorded through the years, including 2 in 1977 that hinted strongly of an alien encounter beneath a screen memory. Amy said that she dreamed of being called out of her house by a small boy standing in a wooded park nearby. He took my hand, she said, and we walked into the park at night. The description of the second dream was more detailed. I just dreamt of a lady doctor gave me a tranquilizer, she noted in an April 1979 entry. Then she disappeared, and the next dream I was being hypnotized. A man whom I seemed to trust and several other people I could barely see were standing around me. The man was so gentle, he told me to relax, and somehow telepathically he explained that the dream I had earlier of receiving a tranquilizer was sort of a pre-hypnotic suggestion to relax me for the next dream. He then hypnotized me. I don't remember the rest, but my feelings in the dream were that of reaching out to those energy forces I call the council. This was one of the most intriguing dream to date. In some ways, it seemed to fit this screening phenomena behind which abductions are often hidden, but it also seems to have a very actual or human element to it. That was not the case, however, with a dream Amy recorded in May 27, 1981, and it was here that the indication of alien activity became palpable. I had the most unusual dream the other night, she noted. I don't ever remember dreaming such a dream before. My body was floating horizontally through the house. I've dreamt of flying before and such, but always vertical and always mixed with unreal elements. But in this dream, I knew I was asleep. I floated through my bedroom door and through the kitchen and turned the corner and floated into the back porch. I saw the walls go by, and each detail was as it really is. I began to note the lack of unconscious symbolism or symbols as in a dream or felt as in a dream and felt alarm. I became frightened at the moment. I felt it was not a dream. I felt suddenly stuck back into my bed through the wall. Amy drew a picture of the scenario she remembered in 1981. Of all the dreams I've ever had, she wrote, I'd say that that was not a dream. It seemed real. It looked real. It felt real. I don't know how, but I know I woke up exactly at the point I drew in the picture. I remember going through the window in the back door. I remember going up through the tree limbs. That's about all I remember until I felt stuck back into my bed. This reminds me of my, as a child, dreaming of floating above the trees and falling back into my body, my legs and arms jerking and waking me up. If there's a near out-of-body experience, I don't know. The details of her dream were exactly like those reported in many abduction onsets. And this, coupled with the early possible missing time episodes and the other indicators, pointed to alien involvement with Amy. She had a conscious UFO sighting the following year in July of 1982 when she was living in North Texas City, where my family and I had also lived at the same time, in fact, though unacquainted with one another. When she first mentioned this sighting to me in an early letter, she skimmed over the incident, saying merely, I think I've only seen a UFO actually 5 UFOs, once when they flew over my apartment years ago. I asked her for more details when we meet, but her account was not much more specific. She said she was outside in the daytime when she saw the 5 craft approaching, and that she had called out to a neighbor to look at them too, and then had walked around her apartment still watching them. But later Amy told me that something weird occurred during that discussion. I didn't tell you, but it has bothered me since, she said. I remember seeing the UFO coming towards me as I sat in front of the apartments. Then they flew slowly and without any sound directly overhead. That part still vividly clear. I realized that they were. I realized what they were, and I got excited. I yelled at the guy in the apartment nearest to come and see them. Then I walked along the under them and directly under them and never took my eye off them. But when I reached the back of the apartments, my memory is all messed up. Up to that point, everything is crystal clear. But after I went to the back of the apartments, I have 2 sets of memories. I remember watching them flying off slowly, but I also remember getting binoculars and my small telescope looking at them. I didn't have binoculars at all, and my telescope was still packed away. This sounds very familiar, this thing. I've read this before somehow, somewhere. Where did I read that? Unfamiliar with the screening practices employed during abductions, Amy couldn't understand how there could be differing memories of the same time span. One memory track contains the conscious parameters of the event, initially sighting of the UFOs, calling to her neighbor, walking towards the back of the apartments and seeing the crafts fly away. What is missing from this track is the continuity from the point when she sees the UFOs directly over her to the point where she is watching them depart a missing time episode. The second memory track apparently provided a filter for that time gap. This memory tells her that she watched the UFOs go through either a telescope or binoculars in that interim, which would have necessitated her going into the apartment at some point and unpacking a box to get the telescope and getting the binoculars, going back outside where her conscious memory picked up again. But this clearly didn't happen in reality, no matter what the second memory track told her, for the box was still packed and she didn't even own binoculars. Something else happened in that time gap which she was not allowed to recall correctly, which is standard operating procedures in an abduction. The event was confusing to Amy, as were the dreams she occasionally had of waving farewell to a UFO. In one such dream from the winter of 1988, she was with her daughters in a field behind their apartment, waving goodbye to a UFO. When I woke up in bed, she said, I was still cold from being outside. I got up and went to make sure the kids were back in bed. That's how real it seemed to me. And all these previous events and dreams and memories, Amy had recalled nothing about actual aliens or being inside a UFO. The dream of November 1992, however, where she clearly saw the gray, masked female, non-Earth representative, took her reluctantly to a much more intense level of recognition that the alien phenomena was part of her life. And when Amy realized how numerous and complex the unusual events had been since her childhood, she decided to explore some of those memories through regressive hypnosis. As a counselor, she was familiar with the theory of regression work, but she had never experienced it. Amy arranged to meet with Barbara Bartholic in the summer of 1992 and went through 2 regression sessions, hoping to learn more about the part of her life that had been kept from her. In the first regression, they explored some early childhood and adolescent memories, but it was extremely difficult for Amy verbally to relate much of what she recalled in the trance state. It became apparent that Amy's response was inhibited by a severe block against talking about her experiences, especially when she was able to remember a threat made to her by a Gray when she was very young. In that fragmented memory, the Gray told her that if she told anyone about the visit, her cat would be killed. Amy did try to tell her mother, however, and the kitten subsequently died, although today Amy is reluctant to believe that death was a deliberate act by the aliens. She also briefly remembered an experience a few years later of a huge craft of some sort hovering just above her father's garden. She told Barbara that she was looking at it very closely, wanting to push it away, but somehow she received a clear impression that said, "Don't touch." Amy said she did not want to go into the craft, but was taken inside, where she saw the same gray who threatened to kill her, the cat. I saw myself talking to someone inside it, she said. T wasn't supposed to tell. That's what it says, T, like the letter T, wasn't supposed to tell. This guy telling me they would kill my cat was inside it. We were near the doorway, and he was taller than I, and his face was right up in my face. Next, she and Barbara explored the memory she had at age 15 of something jabbing and kicking her at the bed and the bed shaking. During this session, she said later, I saw myself going to the back door. I couldn't understand because I looked sort of ghost-like, and I was floating, not walking. As she tried to look at this event, however, the same scene kept repeating of her going to the door and reaching for the knob, and she couldn't get past that point. I guess it was too hard to look at, she said. I remember the actual feelings of something in my room and being kicked and jabbed in my back. It felt so real. It was terrifying. The third episode we explored involved the childhood lesson about religion. Churches are not God, she reported being told. Statues and pictures are not God. Priests and nuns are not God. Nobody sins. That doesn't make sense. What else did they tell you? Barbara asked. To look beyond the pictures, Amy replied. It's all lies. That made me mad. That all nuns and priests were lying. Why did they tell me that when it's not tell me that when it was not true? They said Jesus was something like a soldier or something, supposed to lead people in some kind of direction. I'll be damned. What did they want you to know? Barbara persisted. That I am not supposed to believe, she said. I can pretend to be confirmed. I have to pretend that I believe it, says the prayers. The second session, Amy retrieved a brief recollection of another dream encounter with a gray she had in April 1993. I had dreamt that some UFOs were picking people up here and there. She told me later certain people, not at random, had stood and waited for them to come. I was supposed to wait. They shined a bright light on me, and then I was in the ship. First I was facing a very shiny surface like mirrors, and then I turned around. I saw a lot of grays at some instruments and controls, very busy. One gray turned to face me, and I knew him. In fact, he was the same gray I saw in November 1992 in front of the moon and light. We talked with our eyes. I felt that he and I were very close once. We had been together once somewhere, and we had been the Next page. The same. It was like we were twins. I actually missed him. I wanted to go back to before because I was remembering something. He told me I was to stay here. I guess he meant in the present. She also described the identity she felt with the twin alien. I felt that I was one of them, she said. I was thinking of Barbara as a human with a mouth. What? I was like looking through the eyes of a gray. If I think of it as I am a human, they seem cold and uncaring. If I remember what I felt to be one of them in the dream, it is not cold and not uncaring, just the way it is. In hypnosis sessions, Amy could see two of them in the bedroom engaged in telepathic conversation, feeling an old kinship with the entity. When Barbara asked why the gray was there, Amy said, I'm not supposed to know. Ask what you are supposed to know, Barbara suggested. He said, in the next decade, people will be expected to think the same, she reported, being taught to think the same, like them, make them easier. Well, that didn't turn out, now did it? Oh, fuck. At least not yet. Expanding later on what she was told, Amy said that the coming decade, the aliens doing the abductions would also promote a program in which people will be taught to think the same. The sad part was that everyone will think it's normal and it is not, and it is their idea. Even being an individual will seem real, but not in actuality. He and other aliens are trying to stop the process. It's been going on for a long time already. Yeah, he called Christianity for one thing. Under hypnosis, as Amy tried to explain this information, she suddenly said, he tells me to remember the rules. I am trying. He was trying to help me remember. Departure from the program will result in synapse damage. It's so hard without words, with words. What was that about? Barbara asked. Do what you know to do, Amy parroted the statement of rules by the gray. Be human, be what you are. Rule number 2, no memories. Rule number 2. Okay. These rules were given to Amy very early in her experiences with unidentified entities, and they always included a program to inhibit her talking about these events. An entry in her journal at age 17 records one of the rules: I must not repeat previous mistakes. Amy said the mistake she was not supposed to repeat was the mistake of telling her mother about the things she had experienced. The first time as an adult, when she tried to tell someone else, external influences stopped her, as the journey entry for December 16, 1979 shows. I was writing a letter to my boyfriend tonight, she recorded, and I was listening to the radio when I began writing of the difference between what the heart feels and what the brain knows. A lesson imparted to her by the council. The radio began emitting every tone tolerable and intolerable to the ear. I was about to say something in a letter. I can't remember what I wanted to say. The interrupting noise contained voices and unison in some foreign language. Under hypnosis, Amy constantly had difficulty talking about the events. She often repeated the rule against telling when Barbara tried to discuss the implanted blocks. Later, Amy was doubtful and couldn't accept the idea of the council programming such an inhibition. It wasn't until she searched back through the old journals and saw entries after entry about not talking that she finally acknowledged the evidence of possible programmed control. Her memories of the November 1992 dream event were much more detailed and easily discussed, as if the programming were ineffective, at least to a point. She penetrated several screens, recognized that the larger spider was actually a floating probe device in the room where her and the human figures she recalled. She also realized that she was with them and the spidery probe for part of the encounter in her own apartment. But most important information to emerge concerned the implants. When she described the flesh-colored objects removed from her ear, she told Barbara that it was used as a transmitter or monitor. Amy said that the masked alien also explained the purpose of the implant she removed from the spine. She said that it short circuits and can kill. Amy said they can kill as many as they want. It's in the neck. It's old, but some people have them. When they want to kill them, I don't like that thing. It does many things. What other things? Barbara inquired. They make people like puppets, Amy explained. She says they can control anyone that way. Bunch of damn robots walking around, but they're taking them out. They're old, sometimes in the base of the spine, real low. How's that only half of the control? But that's only half the control. The other half controls up and down, up to the brain and down the body. Old, they use something else now. Where does the new one go? Barbara asked. The cerebellum, Amy answered. How do they put it in? Not in the back like the old ones, Amy replied, pointing instead to a spot behind her ear. You couldn't take it out, only they can. They can make it, and the people with the new ones and the old ones in them do what they tell them to do. If they don't, there'll be other things. Switch them like puppets. Switch them off. They can kill them, turn it many different degrees. They can use it as punishment and take away control, but leave consciousness, or control the consciousness, or they can kill. I'm mad. On one end it can kill, on the other end control, and in between levels. Punishment is in the middle where there's consciousness but no control. Repetition over and over, the fear takes over. They don't have to punish anymore. Fear is paired with punishment, so they don't have to move the switch so far. Fear and control. If that doesn't work, they switch to kill. When the body stops, it disintegrates all implants. Electrically active activity ceases. That's gross but funny. They use our own brains as the batteries. Feedback loop like a generator through the implant and circuits back. When the circuit is broken, the implant dissolves like a little tic-tac. How many people do you think have implants? Barbara asked. Is there a selection? Whoever responds to fear in any degree, Amy replied. They test you. And she says they tested me for fear, nuclear holocaust fear, referring to nuclear nightmares. I did good because and became afraid. I was wondering how they found me. Oh, follow the signal. The old ones they can follow easily. They changed the new ones, changed the signals, those buggers. The abducting and implanting aliens. No, they apologetic alien human group out there taking them out. They don't like it. That's why they change them sometimes and put in different signals. Who does the changing? Barbara asked. The others. Other tribes, Amy tried to explain. Barbara asked her to describe these others, but Amy was focused on something else. She says it's here in a year, she says, pointing to her forehead. What is here in a year? Barbara asked. What I'll need tools, Amy answered. Focus very important. She says I am not ready yet to know. In a year, she said, I'll remember the three guys standing over there. They're watching. They're not regular. They can talk with their eyes. Don't know if they learned it or what. The silver-haired one and the one with glasses. Are the aliens? Some, their eyes, they wear contact covers. Without them, Amy explained, they're slits, but they look like people. Not cat eyes, too big. A line. He says he's a lot like me anyway. Gray silver hair. He's the main one. He's telling me to forget them. 6 foot tall, average built, regular shirt. How about his face? Kind of not thin, but fat. Real size of right size for the body, she said. The eyes don't fit. She's indicated that the man had a willow peak hairline, coarse hair, and she said average length, like an average businessman. He could be one with those contact lenses. He's nice. What about the other two men? Barbara asked. He said, don't look. He let me look at him, but not them. One has contacts, though I saw that. Brown, dark eyes, but no pupil or iris or center spot. If people look closely, that's why they sometimes wear tinted glasses. A ghost. I added that. How do you feel about these guys? Barbara wanted to know. Sad, Amy told her. They used to be where I was, manipulated by them. They don't want to tell me too much because it was more than I could take. That's why he says to look away. Are all humans manipulated? Not all. As difficult as it was for Amy to speak freely in a trance state, out of hypnosis later she described the things she'd been unable to articulate. She gave detailed descriptions of the scene in the dining room where she saw the probe accompanying the three men. After being introduced to the masked alien, she was next aware of being taken into a large underground room. She was led by two beings into the room, noticing the rough rock walls that proved her was below ground level. At that time, she lived directly across the street from a FEMA underground facility. That facility has undergone a massive expansion, both above ground with numerous antenna arrays and new buildings, and below the ground as well. But there was no way of knowing if she were in the facility, or somewhere else. Amy sketched a room at the facility where she and the men were with the masked aliens. She had smelled a certain odor during the hypnotic recollection, resembling polish remover, which came from a black ribbed tube on the side of the room. The masked alien told her it helped the aliens present to breathe better. And when a question about evidence of military atmosphere in the facility, Amy said she didn't observe any. She had more to say about the humans too, especially the silver-haired leader she nicknamed Old Slit Eyes. Ever since the hypnosis session, she remarked, the image of Old Slit Eyes has stayed with me vividly. Once you talk that way, you always feel the link. I get the feeling Old Slit Eyes is either in our government or some high position in the military. She added, people see him every day, but don't know who he really is. As for the other two men, she said, the feeling I got from those three guys was deep sadness. They were designed like we are. They were watching me talk with the old gray and assessing how I handle the information and my loyalty. It was just a feeling I caught from them. Concerned about what she remembered being told of the implant's placement and the functions, Amy went to medical texts for information about the cerebellum and the medulla oblongata. Is that how you pronounce it? I don't know if I'm saying it right now. The locations identified for the implant. She learned that The medulla is a switching center for the nerve impulses of the higher brain centers controlling vital functions such as temperature, pulse, swallowing, and breathing. The cerebellum was identified as the control source for muscle tone and equilibrium, as well as voluntary movements, coordination, and even vocal cords, which Amy noted might explain the physical difficulty some abductees experience when trying to discuss their encounters. The information corresponded with the controls the masked aliens said were functions of the implant. I need to take a break. After November 1992 dream event, Amy continued to recall several other dream memories. She had a sudden flashback memories and also witnessed some overt evidence of alien intrusions. She had more dreams of moving through solid objects, one involving her daughter, and Amy said that she was not happy about seeing entities with them, although she felt the tall ones standing there with them were quiet, and wise, and rather nice. She dreamed of being aboard a craft, again with masked aliens, who said that humans were going to be told who and what they really are, as well as the truth about everyone. In another dream, she also made to feel that the government was was going to kill her for talking about what the government was doing to people. During one teaching dream, Amy woke up and could actually hear the voice of a lady talking in her head. It was not a dream. She noted in her journal and tried to write what the lady was saying, heard her say no, and suddenly began forgetting. Tried to write fast, but hand went numb. Well, that's interesting. And I was tired all day. Tired all day. I took a nap. More teaching dreams. One of the most disturbing dreams occurred in June 1993, where Amy said she had a vivid sensation of being held still by wires or tubes going into her head. Everything about the dream felt real. I was pissed, she said. I could actually feel something going into my head. I wanted to pull them out, but I couldn't get my hands up to my head, and my hands wouldn't move. And then I heard someone say in my mind, "You don't want to pull them out. You will hurt yourself." And with that warning, I saw a clear image of what would happen if I pulled the things out of my head. I saw the wires and tubes coming out, and pieces of my brain were stuck to them and dropped off onto the floor. Just had to be still until it was finished. It didn't hurt, she added. I was just so mad at not being able to move my head. I've never had a dream like that before. I'm still mad as hell. On the night of September 20th, 1993, Amy experienced a time gap. And she, and her record of the event and her journal is very typical of such reports. After first noting that the phone made a strange beep around 11:17 p.m., she wrote, I was sitting here at my desk in my study, and I noticed that I felt funny all of a sudden. I felt the sudden and brief anxiety of feeling before. Try this again. I felt that sudden brief anxiety feeling before. Her daughter walked in at that moment, and Amy reacted angrily because the child should have been in bed by that time. It's 12:07 a.m. Then I went back to my work, and she wrote, I felt bad that I yelled at Grace. A few minutes later, I heard a noise that sounded like the doorknob of the front door being turned. I thought Grace was opening the door to look for me when I take the dog out. I jumped up and looked out the little window on the front door, but Grace was not outside. I turned on the light, but no one was on the porch. I opened the door and looked out, but no one was outside. I thought it was strange that I had heard that sound. I went back to my work in my study. Then I looked at the time. It was 1:27 a.m. I couldn't believe it. I lost an hour and 20 minutes. Seamlessly, the time gap had occurred, and she had no memory of any disruption. But other times, she had flashback memories pop up suddenly, including one scene in which she woke up one night hearing the words, "Did you think it was all by accident?" The statement's meaning was clear, and she said that the Earth is a giant zoo or experiment. Other such downloadings of ideas and scenes included one of a future world our children will inherit, a world that is dying. On one occasion, the thought we were without form played through her head repeatedly. Two other such thoughts were more disturbing. Survival of the fittest, that's why wars are promoted, one said, and the other repeated, death is a journey home. She also recalled a lesson in which showed how the aliens use frightening images through mental projections to control humans. Fear is a real enemy, she said. In April 1993, Amy had her first taste of phenomenon all too familiar to abductees. The black helicopters, after the first one flew over her home, she noted, they really don't exist now. I know what one looks like. The other such flights have occurred since then, frequently late at night, with repeated circular passes over her home. And like so many other abductees, Amy has reason to believe her child has been touched by the phenomenon. Our daughter recently said her leg was tingling, the way it feels when you put it through a wall, indicating that to Amy that the child might well have been receiving the same sort of instruction she herself had. Her other daughter described two types of balls of light she has seen repeatedly in the house. One is larger than a basketball and multicolored, The other type is smaller, displaying a trail or a tail of some sort. Amy was very concerned about future evidence of her children's involvement after what she thought was a dream turned out to be highly questionable. In the first part, she was aboard a ship with several smaller grays and 2 or 3 6-foot-tall entities. The grays told her that human concepts of Armageddon were not correct. I remember thinking that what they told me was nothing like anything I or anyone had ever imagined, she said. While this occurred, Amy said she could feel the taller beings directing the lecture and that their mind was in her mind and intensely felt presence that made her want to cry. It was similar to the intensity of the lady who taught her things, she said. No matter how tough I considered myself to be, I wouldn't stand a chance against the tall ones, she emphasized. I think they remind me that they have me, body and soul, and always have had me. In the next part of the dream, she and her daughter, Grace, were involved in a series of scenes and events culminating with a police car approaching them. Amy said it had very bright lights that were not right for the police car. The policeman inside, whom she didn't like, spoke to her, but then she awoke from the dream when her other daughters began coughing. She later went back to bed, hearing a loud static buzz sound before falling asleep. The next morning, while cooking, Amy said her ear began to itch. I rubbed my finger in my ear and felt something inside and outside my ear. I looked at my finger and there was some dry blood on it. I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. I could see dry blood in my ear and down my cheek. Frightened that this had something to do with the strange dream, she carefully, next page, questioned her daughters to see if their night had been disturbed. Grace said she had a weird dream, and Amy began to tell her about the dream she had, and when she reached the part about the colored lights on the police car, Grace finished the sentence for her, describing them as like a rainbow. Amy asked her how she remembered seeing them, but Grace couldn't explain. Amy's memories and the children's various remarks indicate alien contact with entire family. Are these aliens or are these something else? What about the something else? Although Amy is more convinced by the hard evidence and the conscious experiences she has witnessed, Grace's recent spat of nosebleeds, for example, are a worrisome indication of possible implant activity. Amy has further been mystified by certain unexplained scars on her body, including the circular scar on her shoulder and 1-inch linear scar down the middle of her nose that appeared in late 1993. This sort of evidence, as well as her conscious daytime UFO sightings, and in January 1994, of 4 objects merging into one, are all unwelcome because they make it difficult for Amy to reject the phenomenon's reality. She knows that it is more than a question of random abductions. From the information she has been shown, she is concerned about the direction and nature of the events indicated by the information. In November 1993, she recorded a vivid dream in which she was with other people in the large room. We were told that we were selected to experience the end of the world, she wrote. God was this ball of light that looked like a little sun. God was telling us that what we experienced was for all, that we should feel honored and lucky to experience the end of the world. It was explained that Amy and the other humans were really spirit beings, seeking challenging experiences. Our true nature is to seek every opportunity to grow and to learn. Even sadness, sorrow, pain, and misery represent opportunities to experience and learn. I understood that this meaning of life was just an experience. That's all experience. And I think there's something deeper going on, to be honest with you, called Loosh. This message resonates with other communication Amy has had for her unseen guides, telling her that humans are a species without a species within a species, and that our bodies are mere containers for the spiritual entities we truly are. Another piece of information came in a conscious flash or vision in which it was explained that a peculiar person would be coming to public notice, claiming to be Christ. Amy said she was shown how all the religious people around the world would perceive this person and as an incarnation of whatever deity they worshipped, and that he would be accepted as God on earth. This would cause many people to turn against those who didn't accept the new figure, leading to the persecution and suppression of what is actually true. In fact, she explained, the false leader and his false religion's teachings would win out over the spiritual truth. A startling encounter in January 1994 has caused Amy to wonder even more about her lifelong involvement with the council. She heard about a very strange group of people who called themselves the Total Overcomers, the Omega group, holding meetings in Dallas area. Two of her acquaintances attended the meetings, and from the details they reported, Amy decided to invite the Overcomers to hold a meeting in her city, which they did. At the meeting, they told Amy and others attending that they had just emerged from their classroom after 18 years of preparation under total guidance with 24 elders. Now, of course, the 24 elders straight from the Bible. Of course, that's bullshit right there, right? That's total bullshit. Somebody's bullshitting. Now they were traveling through the country to harvest the people who had been implanted with the proper knowledge and who were ready to make the transition to the next stage of more than human. Okay, where was that? I had to use the bathroom. This required breaking all human ties of love, family and friendship bonds to keep us tied to the material world, as well as living in celibacy and surrendering all decisions to the elders. They also said that everyone but our group had been warped and programmed negatively, either by society's false values or in cases of alien contact, by Luciferian aliens, which included all groups except one that had originally instructed the elders. Amy described the four overcomers whom she met as tall, thin, pale, asexual, and dress, black clothing, hairstyle, clone-like in appearance, and rigidly controlled emotionally. In fact, she said that she could not feel any souls in these four people. Their message was equally rigid. Followers must go with the overcomers immediately without a word to their families, with no belongings, without any clue as to where they will go next. These cultish demands were weird enough to Amy, but the truly disturbing aspect of the overcomer, she said, was the details and phrasing of their tenets given by the elders, for they echoed exactly the things that Amy had been taught by the council, and products of those teachings, and this cult at least felt extremely wrong. After all I've been learning about the implants and mind control, she told me, I must ask who the council really is. I am so afraid of them now. We shouldn't be afraid of them. You should just dismiss them altogether. I must ask okay, I'm afraid of them now. What if they have been programming me all this time to do things someday that may not be good for my planet? They have never told me to do anything contrary to my beliefs before, but what if they are just gaining my trust? What if they really are good and teaching me to help my planet and I stop listening to them? What if they are just some defense mechanism and all just my imagination? Somehow I'd rather be crazy than for it all to be real. So since I don't know who and what the council really is, I am listening to them more cautiously. I just keep asking God to help me find the truth. God, I am sure of. Case number, is this case, I guess, or is this chapter 10, I guess. Casey and Karla. So this is back to Casey and Karla. It's chapter 10, I guess. After asking these 8 courageous women to share their experiences with the public, it is only proper that I also give an account of the things my husband, Casey, and I have witnessed since the first year of activity recounted into the fringe. We have repeatedly been asked about further experiences, and the following summary will serve to fulfill that request. In addition to increasing the body of knowledge upon which research depends, the first intense period of dealing with alien activity lasted from late 1987 through most of 1990. But after that, the encounters dramatically waned in our daily lives. We breathed a figurative sigh of relief, hoping that the aliens had moved on to another task. Besides, having become active in abduction research, this relatively peaceful period allowed us to focus on learning from other people's experiences, expanding our base of knowledge from the personal level to the general society. I still keep a calendar notation of any questionable or unusual events, but the frequency was so low that the journal wasn't needed any longer. And in all of 1990, for instance, I recorded signs of only 8 possible events, only 3 of which were evinced. Evinced, is that what it means? Uh, in the conscious or objective manner. In addition to some unexplained body marks, I witnessed another UFO sighting on February. Leaving a friend on at 8:15 p.m., I saw a huge white object flying rapidly at a very low altitude above above 3 tall towers in the city. Driving on, however, I lost track of it, but when I reached my own neighborhood, I saw it again. I decided to go to the hill near our house and have one more look. When I parked, I walked to a prominence to get a wide view. I immediately saw the same light coming from the west towards the south. It was moving much more slowly now, and bobbing along rhythmically instead of in a smooth, straight path. It passed between the downtown skyline and me, so I knew it couldn't be more than a mile away. It began to grow larger, as if moving closer. I felt ready to confront it at last in full consciousness, but after a bit the light receded, still bobbing, and continued on into the south. I ran down the hill to the car, thinking I'd drive home for Casey and bring him back to see the object. Then I thought I should have one last look to determine where I would likely find it visible when we returned. So I raced back up the hill and looked around, and the light was not where I had previously seen it. I turned back in disappointment, and then caught sight of it again, in the very position it had started from the first time. The bobbing light silently repeated its path, once again coming close for a time and then backing away. I returned quickly to the car, and then I drove a half-block distance to my home. The streets were deserted as I pulled into the garage. When I ran inside and yelled for Casey to come with me, he looked up puzzled from the couch and asked if I had pulled into the garage twice. No, of course not, I replied. Why did you ask that? Then I guess must have been a truck out on the street, he said. But it sure was loud for just a truck. What are you talking about? I asked. This huge noise, he said, about 30 seconds before you came into the garage. It was so loud that the whole front of the house shook, like some huge tanks or trucks were barreling down the street. I was just on the street, I objected, and there was nothing out there. But I did see a UFO up on the hill. We drove together back to the prominence, and were disappointed to see nothing but the usual air traffic in the sky. At no time during 1990 did either of us have a conscious encounter, just signs that something might have been going on. Emotionally and intellectually, we had nothing concrete with which to deal. In 1991, however, at least in the beginning, that was not the case. Both Casey and I felt a great directed stress, as we'd done back in 1988, and that experience told us that activity might be reoccurring, which was kept repressed from our consciousness. In January, our son's friend James reported encounters with unusual entities, one which once masked itself with the illusion of a beautiful blonde woman before revealing a very different physiology. Casey also recalled a possible encounter with a blonde group that month, which had seemed like a VRS dream event, as recounted in Into the Fringe. For Casey, the event was disturbing and puzzling, and we both wondered if anything further could occur, but nothing similar happened, nothing but a few unexplained marks until April. Shortly before leaving for the Ozark UFO conference early that month, we had a phantom sedan incident reminiscent of Men in Black reports. In this event, a very real-looking black car rolled down the street, came to a near stop as it reached our yard boundary, and a human-looking man in a white shirt and dark suit wearing sunglasses peered through the car's deeply tinted window into the front of our house, where I was standing staring back out. I turned around and shouted to Casey to come and see it, and when I looked back, the car had vanished. In June, the mysterious helicopters returned, appearing on 3 different days. By the end of the month, we made a permanent move to Arkansas, and thereafter, in an area with heavy normal helicopter traffic, it was impossible to tell if any of it was unusual. We found a few questionable marks on our bodies in August, but it wasn't until October that a memory of anything specific turned up. During the night of the 14th, I physically got out of bed at some point. I also had a dream that aliens were about to come into a long, narrow room where I was waiting. My only thought was, don't scare me, but nothing more remained in my... Next page. Consciousness. In spite of the bruise on my arm and scratch on my abdomen in the morning. This sounds like demon possession to me. One other incident in July of 1992 involved another almost conscious realization that an intrusion was occurring. I woke up at 1:34 a.m., opened my eyes, and wondered why the room was so foggy. My immediate rationalization was that my eyes just hadn't yet focused. I got out of bed to go to the bathroom, and when I started walking, a sudden rush of thick, clear liquid with tiny black specks suspended in it floated from me. Much more than can be produced naturally by the body, but I had no idea where it had come from. Neither could I account for the new scratches and bruises I found the next day. These things were physically real, yet something within me didn't really come to grips with what might be happening to us. I wouldn't let these events obsess me or throw me off track from researching other people's situations. If the aliens wanted to get my attention again, they were going to have to do a lot better than this. I decided strange snippets of the dream, now and then a few marks, and even the liquid, the significance of which I certainly knew from other women's accounts, weren't enough to frighten me or move me in any serious way. I refused to feel under attack, and even granting that some activity was occurring, but I was only able to keep this frame of mind because I wasn't perceiving them consciously. For months thereafter, neither Casey nor I noticed anything inexplicable or suspicious. Throughout most of 1992, I was busy with radio and newspaper interviews, and the result of Into the Fringe being released. I also worked on a research project involving Ted Rice, a well-known psychic, and Shreveport, Louisiana, whose lifelong experiences with alien forces shed extraordinary light on some of the abduction activities which have been so hard to penetrate. The period of no unusual activity, however, came to an end with a bang on the morning of October 13th. I was sitting at a coffee table working on Ted's material when a large ball of white light appeared and exploded right in front of me, less than 4 feet away. There was no noise, so I realized I hadn't merely seen a reflection. There was no noise, so I realized I hadn't merely seen a reflected flash from an explosion. 5 minutes later, a noise did occur. A very loud and pounding noise that is slammed against the kitchen wall with a house-shaking thump. My dog started up and barking, and we ran to the kitchen door to see what had happened. The garage doors were closed and locked. However, with nothing out of the ordinary in sight, my immediate response was a feeling that this was an announcement of some sort, a declaration of a renewed presence, and from the past experience, I could recognize the feel of this intrusion. There was no fear or anger in my mind, just a complete determination to face whatever would come next. That proved to be a UFO sighting. On October 27th at 7 p.m., our neighbors phoned to say they'd been watching a UFO for the past 10 minutes and wanted us to come out and for a look. I had dinner cooking just then, but Casey and a visiting friend raced up the road in time to watch the odd orange-red orb, seen that one before, of light disappearing behind tree lines. The neighbors said they saw the orbs change colors from white to orange, and that at one point a solid-looking beam of light emerged and moved around before retracting back into the UFO as it moved away. Since this event was witnessed, we didn't feel it was aimed at us. UFO sightings are surprisingly frequent in Central Arkansas, and they are often seen by multiple witnesses. This sighting, although momentarily exciting, was oddly unaffecting. If this sighting report had come from someone else, I would have recognized the pacified response, but it's much harder to analyze oneself than someone else. The next month, as I started a dusk stroll up the drive, I had my most bizarre UFO sighting to date. And again, I experienced a sedated reaction and absolute silence. A large rectangular craft soared over my mother-in-law's cottage, which is 30 feet from our house, just above treetop level. My first response was exhilaration, and I started to run up the driveway to follow it, but its speed, while not startling, was fast enough that the craft was soon out of sight and blocked by the tall, thick trees on our property. I observed it long enough to get a clear picture, though. It reminded me of a train boxcar in length and width, although not quite as tall. It looked metallic brown, and the bottom of the craft had an indentation or bar across the middle, with a large amber light at each end. 4 more amber lights marked each corner of the triangle object. How is 4? Okay. For a total of 6 lights. I wonder how that'd be 4. 6. Anyways, math doesn't make sense to me. Within a matter of seconds, my exhilaration disappeared along with the craft, and instead of racing inside to get Casey, I just began to stroll again. When I did go back in, I told him of the sighting and that I hadn't had time to notify him before the craft flew off. My natural excitement and curiosity felt artificially suppressed, so much so that I didn't even make a notation of the sighting on my calendar. In fact, it simply faded from my memory for almost 2 weeks before I suddenly remembered it again. After experiencing this response several times, I am now convinced that it is externally imposed and thus denotes outside contact of a very real nature. At the time, however, I was unconcerned. My friend Brenda was in the midst of a much more overt alien intrusion in her home, and they seemed more important than a few things we experienced ourselves. Besides, as I decided earlier, it would take something highly significant to pique my interest and get me to interact on a personal level with the aliens again. On January 8, 1993, it got rather personal when I woke up to find my clothing had been removed. I hadn't been the one who removed them. This was always upsetting to me when it occurred in the past, for it made me feel intimately and helplessly violated. I had the same response this time, and when I phoned Brenda to discuss it the next morning, she told me of a dream she had the same night I was in it. She dreamed she was aboard a craft, immobile on a table, and she could see me on the table beside her, also unable to move. She said she tried desperately to reach out to me, but couldn't, and that's all she recalled. I had no memory to match the event, but the missing clothing was indicative of some nocturnal activity I hadn't generated. It was Casey's turn in February. On the morning of the 17th, he told me that in the middle of the night at 12:38 a.m., a loud bang noise awaked him from a dream. Normally I am the one who awakes out of at any sound while he sleeps through everything. And the dream, he had been standing in the living room looking out the picture window at the ridge behind our property. A large white orb appeared in the sky and descended to the ridge. He told me that he instantly remembered the dream when he was awakened by the bang, and that he then got out of bed and walked into the living room. Just as in a dream, he stood peering out the window, watching in full consciousness as a large white orb appeared and descended to the ridge. What happened then? I asked, and he shrugged. I guess I went back to bed, he said, but I honestly don't remember doing it, and his response was curiously passive, as mine had been. This time I noticed and determined to be more alert if anything else were to occur, to fight the passive effect in order to react the way I thought best, rather than the way some outside force directed me. Okay.
You're going to try, go all the way. Otherwise, don't even start. If you are going to try, go all the way. This could mean losing girlfriends, wives, relatives, jobs, and maybe your mind.
Take it slow. Are you searching?